How much of a benefit is it to get involved on construction sites and be out there looking at projects prior to designing as an engineer? Well, in this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Brian Maver of WHM Structural Engineers. And that's exactly what Brian did. He spent the early part of his career in construction, then went to school for his degree and has built a structural engineering consulting firm with partners. And in this episode, he's going to talk about what that's done for his career. He's also going to talk about how, as an engineer, as a principal in a firm, you really need to be strategic and think about the strategy of growing the firm long term. But first, a word from our sponsor. Before we go on here, I'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, Tensar International.
Check out Tensar Plus, the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. It leverages our decades of research and experience with soils all over the world, so you can count on your solutions working the first time, even in the most difficult conditions. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Specs, reports, and product data can be generated for your design, and training resources, research, and our third-party expert reviews are all provided conveniently in the software if needed. Usable both online and offline, the app is available in browser and on all major mobile platforms. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
All right, now I'd like to welcome my guest onto the show today. Brian Maver is one of the founding principals at WHM Structural Engineers. Brian, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Thank you, Anthony. Welcome. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'm excited to have you. Always like talking to, those that are in those high-level positions in companies, to getting some thoughts on the growth of the company. You're obviously one of the founding principals, which is really great. So let's talk about that. Take us through your career and what led you to become a founding principal at the company. What made you get to that point in your career?
Well, I guess I could step back to way back into my childhood. I always had ambition to get into construction, get into buildings, being involved in some way. I wasn't exactly sure what that was, but I just didn't know how to get there. So when I graduated high school, I ended up taking some courses in business because I knew at some point in time I wanted to have my own business, but just didn't exactly know what that would be. And then after that, I ended up getting some work in construction. So swinging a hammer and pushing a broom and that sort of thing, and got to see what was going on a construction site, which I felt was really, really beneficial, which then led me, I guess there were engineers coming on site telling us what we had to do and that sort of thing. And with my, I was really intrigued, okay, why? And so that's what led me to go into engineering school. And so at the age of 26, a little bit later in my career, I went back to engineering school, got my degree, and got a job at a really good structural engineering firm here in Canada, fairly well respected. And that's where I met Dan Wicke and Richard Herfst, who were also working at that firm. And so we became pretty good friends at that time. After a period of time, they ventured off to a couple other firms, but I think what led us to start WHM was there was a lot of projects coming across our desk that didn't necessarily, we weren't able to put the attention to them that we felt that they deserved. And so what we wanted to do was to be able to control the workflow a little bit better, a little bit within our control anyways. And so that's how we founded WHM Structural Engineers. So Dan, Richard, and I, we got together one day at a restaurant and we started hashing out our business plan. And before you know it, in 2006, we started up WHM Structural Engineers.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, listen, it's being a business owner myself, I know it's a really kind of a huge leap, if you will. I think your point of, having some more control and being able to do some of the things you weren't able to do is great. But I think at the same time too, obviously as an owner of a business, there's a lot more other responsibilities, right? That then you're the kind of tasked with and you have to deal with. So it's certainly a big decision. So that was what, 2006?
That was in 2006 when we started. Yes. Yes.
So tell us about the company today. What's the size? How are things going? Tell us about the services you offer, just so everyone gets a feel for the company.
So our primary focus is structural design for buildings. So everything from high-end single-family homes through to concrete towers. Many projects in between, both in the public and private space. So this would include fire halls, community centers, 4 or 5 story, 6-story wood frame condos, wide variety of buildings. We also do a bunch of light industrial tilt up. So we play in many different sectors within the building industry. We've slowly grown as a firm, not for the sake of growing, but just because we've garnered clients over the years. And so we've been growing. And so we're about a team of around 45 or so people right now.
That's great.
So we can do a fair number of projects of all sorts of sizes. I mean, some of the projects we've worked on for a firm like ours were upwards of $500, $600 million in construction,
Wow,
over 1 million square feet. So we can handle some fairly decent sized projects.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's definitely a really good size for a structural design firm. I mean, I know we've recently had some executives on from civil firms that have a lot of different disciplines, civil, environmental, and they maybe, I mean, 45 for structural design, it means you're capable to handle quite a bit. Obviously, you can hear that. And you're located where are you located again?
We're in Vancouver, British Columbia,
Canada.
Okay,
British Columbia. Yeah. Great. All right. So you started the company in 2006. Today you're at 45 people, which is really good growth. Like you said, you're growing strategically and sustainably, not just growing for the sake of growing, which is kind of what I want to talk to you about next. So as a principal, as a leader in the company, talk a little bit about kind of your role with the strategic direction of the firm. And this is a highly competitive industry. There's lots of work out there today. There's, probably more work coming with some of the funding and other things going on with infrastructure. Talk to us about your role when you look at the firm and the kind of decisions and things you have to think about as you grow.
So, I mean, obviously HR is a big component. We are a service company, and so it's people that essentially is what we're offering to our clients. So that is a really big thing. Systems within the company in that there's consistencies in design and approaches. So as we've grown, we've started to introduce new systems. So such as what we call our E-manual, which is an engineering manual. This is how we're going to design a footing. This is how we're going to do columns. This is how a project is being developed. This is how a project is, or how it's going to be drafted. So we have a drafting manual as well, so that we can start to become consistent within the company. So there's those internal things that we do. Externally, in terms of markets that we go into, we always want to play in multiple different sectors, because the economy is always switching and always adjusting. So we don't ever want to be pigeonholed in one sector. So we do a lot of residential, multi-unit residential. It's really booming right now. So we're doing a fair amount of that. But we also do a lot of institutional work. So if the residential market starts to decline, usually the institutional municipality work starts to increase a little bit. They start putting funding, the government starts to put funding into the industry to keep the economy going. So we can flush out those increases and decreases in the various sectors, and we can pivot our team very easily. So from a strategy point of view, working in all these sectors is really critical to us. We also find as well that working in the private industry with developers, that sort of thing, it's efficiency, 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 efficiency as much as possible. So what we learn with our systems from there, we can pass that on to on the institutional side as well. So if, say, for instance, if we're doing a community center with a gym, I mean, the gym part is a big box. We can design that super efficiently. But then we use our design team where we do, say, some really high-end homes, which has lots of architectural wonderment. We can take that experience and put that towards the atrium or the front entrance, and be able to work with the architects and do something fantastic there. So as a strategy, as I say, we try to play in different markets and different sectors, and take all the benefits of those, share those benefits with the other sectors as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, to me, it's very much like if you have an investment portfolio, right? You're not going to put all your money in the same type of stock. You're going to try to diversify, if you will. And that's kind of what you're doing by getting into these different markets. And I can certainly see how that would be a really important role of leadership in the firm, right? To focus on that diversification. And what does that look like in terms of the strategy? Are you like, would you have like regular strategy meetings, maybe like once a month or once a quarter? Like, do you have a process for that, or how does that look for you and your fellow leaders there?
Well, we actually meet once per week, mainly to go over the workload for the week and that sort of thing. And then that's a forum where we can bring up ideas or thoughts, because oftentimes we're going to conferences or other events, community events for the construction industry and that sort of thing. And so we can share those thoughts. And so with the leadership team, we can brainstorm ideas as to where we should be going, or which sectors we should be hitting up, or which clients we should be chasing after. So yeah, we always have our ear to the ground to see what projects are coming up, and so that's where the start of any new direction would arise, is generally from there. Further to that, myself and Dan Wicke, we have weekly meetings as well to just discuss how things are going within the company, and any other ideas or thoughts that we may have to piggyback on those items that we would meet with the rest of the team on Mondays.
That's great. No, that's awesome. So, you obviously work with a lot of professionals in the civil and structural space. You've, I'm sure hired quite a few of them as well. Just from your experience, Brian, what would you say is kind of one of the real key traits or characteristics that are important for professionals to have today in our industry?
I think communication skills is really critical. To be able to pick up a telephone and talk to a client or an architect to solve any problems or solve any issues, or come up with a design alteration or something that's going to work with them, I think is really critical. I think this day and age, people tend to fall on emails too much. And with emails, it's very difficult to emote tone.
Right.
So one thing I relate to our staff here is, if you send out an email that's, say, it's at a neutral tone, you're writing it on a neutral tone, oftentimes it'll be read slightly negative. So if you want an email to come across being neutral, you have to actually write it a little bit on the positive side. Right. And then they'll read it probably neutral. And similarly, if you want to really have something really positive, really exciting, you have to go right to the extreme, because for some reason, there's been studies out there that people will just read things with a negative bent. So oftentimes when you're dealing with emails and that's trying to coordinate positions and stuff like that, sometimes the tone can be come across as abrasive. Oh, we need this column here. Okay, well, an architect can say that, well, then that means I don't have any other choice. And so now you're handcuffing me. It's got to be right there. When in fact, well, we want it there, but we could adjust it, slide it around. How you emote that in an email is it takes a lot more writing. So picking up the phone, having good and chatting over it, or doing things such as this now with Teams and Zoom,
Right.
people are now able to share a screen and they can go over it and talk about it.
Yeah. So it's a big part of it is really knowing, which form of communication to use in different situations, essentially. Right.
Right.
And knowing that in this situation, and in some situations, an email may be necessary if you're trying to get some kind of approval on something, but it may be a follow-up phone call or a video call could also be beneficial to further explain or make sure that people have a good grasp on what you're trying to get across. So yeah, I think that's important.
Exactly.
I think it's important to know the right form of communication to use and when you might need to do something a little bit extra, like to your point, either put a little extra slant on the email or pick up the phone afterwards and call and reinforce it.
Right. And of course, we also promote that when we do have those conversations that you do follow up with an email, hey, just to confirm,
right?
Just so that everybody understands completely exactly what was discussed. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, Brian, that you kind of were turned on to engineering because you got a job in construction, and that's how you were turned on to it. So how does your construction experience, how has that influenced your engineering design career, if at all?
Understanding the limitations of construction, I think, is important. So in school, we learn about precision and accuracy and that sort of thing. And, if I'm calculating my depth D for the depth of a beam or something like that, where my rebar is, it's not going to be within 0.1 of an inch. I mean, if it's going to be within an inch, you're getting lucky. So just kind of understanding that. I think also knowing that there's elegance and simplicity. So trying to create details that are easy for the contractor to build. A, it's a lot easier for them to interpret. B, it can get relayed down to some of the trades a lot easier. C, there'll be less issues, doing the reviews and making sure that it's correct. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I pulled out of being in construction, is just understanding what are those easier ways of building it and kind of putting their shoes on and trying to understand how they would go about approaching it. Oftentimes we do work on complicated structures, doing seismic upgrades and that sort of thing. It can be very complicated. So trying to break it down into simple components and come up with easy solutions is super beneficial for the contractor and for the client, because ultimately then it becomes easier to build and more cost effective. So I'd say just understanding the contractor's point of view is probably one of the biggest things that I've garnered out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you in that. And I've had the similar experience. I worked as a surveyor, basically, when I was in college, out in the field a lot on construction sites. And I think what it really does is it does really teach you the practicality of what we do, what's practical as opposed to, I remember just from my own experience, when we were doing like a parking lot design, you would see that someone would put like a stormwater catch basin and have it's easy in AutoCAD to draw 4 or 5 pipes going into it. But in reality, you're not going to be able to get 4 or 5 pipes into one of those boxes. Right. So
right.
It was little things like that I think helped me to be more practical as a designer, which you just won't learn. And I understand that not everyone is going to be able to maybe get a construction job before going into engineering school like Brian, but you certainly can get internships and opportunities where you're in the field. And I do think that that's critically important. And I think for those of you that may be executives or in leadership roles, you should really work hard to get your younger professionals, recent graduates, into those roles where they're getting out on project sites early. They're seeing how things are built. It's just it's so much different when you're designing something and you've seen it being constructed before than when you're just going on images or pictures or videos that you've watched. It's just a different feel. really?
We oftentimes have students coming in to do a co-op term after their first year of school. And one of the biggest things we recommend to them, it's really hard for us to bring on a first year or second year co-op, but we highly recommend go on to site, get a position with a contractor and see what's going on site, see how things are getting put together, because that's extremely valuable, especially when you get into your third and fourth years of school, because then you have an idea as to what you're actually designing. So
That's
yeah,
great.
absolutely.
No, it's great advice. So we're in a industry that's rapidly changing in terms of technology. A firm your size, how do you monitor the technological trends and software and tools? I know in the structural industry, every day I feel like there's a new tool that you can use to do design or modeling or things of that nature. So from a high level strategy perspective, how does your firm stay on top of those things and decide when or when not to kind of maybe implement something new?
Right. So we do have a lot of industry people do come to our office. And so we do a lot of lunch and learns, and they're introducing us to various technologies. We also go to local conferences about what is being introduced out there from the industry point of view. Being a design profession, we tend to be a target for that, because we would be one of the first to either introduce a new technology for design or introduce a technology, say a material.
Okay.
So we bring in these, we do monthly lunch and learn. Sometimes it's more often than that, or there'd be some courses that we would send our students out to take or do to make sure that any new technologies we're abreast of, or we're fully aware of. Ironically, it's in the building industry, it's very difficult to try and shift and change things. We find that sometimes the industry can be somewhat risk averse. And so what they've been doing for the last 10, 15 years, they're comfortable with it. It works in their performance. And I'm thinking on the private sector here. They know their performance are working, so they just want to move ahead with that. But we've recently, over the last few years, we've been introducing this new fiber into our designs where it can help to replace traditional reinforcing bars. We spent a considerable amount of time in our office to vet the product internally so that we understood it carefully, and so now we've been using it on some of our projects as well.
Wow, that's great.
Interesting. It's an interesting material, actually, quite interesting. So that's, I think, a conversation for another time.
Yeah, maybe for our structural engineering podcast,
Yes,
that could be a good one.
absolutely.
So well, and the reason I asked that question is because I feel like technology is one of those things that can be extremely beneficial, but can also be extremely distracting because there's new ones coming out every day. So I feel like you just have to have kind of a good filter on being able to, have a certain amount of time and attention on that so that you are finding things that will help you to be better and to better serve your clients. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there may be a new technology that comes out that's 1% better than the one you're using now. And it's not really worth it to go through that whole process of replacing it. So
right.
Seems like something that you just have to get good at and have a good, consistent process to kind of keep an eye on it.
Yeah. So new software, sometimes we'll bring in a new software and we'll have one person dedicated to it for a week or 2 weeks just to go through it and play around. Okay, what, is this good? Is this bad? Like, can we get anything out of this? And yeah, many times it's not really the right fit for us. So we've explored it and we'll just put that away. But there's other times where the technology is great, and so we would adopt it.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about collaboration. The nature of the work that you do is extremely collaborative, both with internal parties, team members, as well as with external, clients, agencies, other stakeholders that you might work with. Talk a little bit about that collaboration and how, how kind of it happens and how important it is to the success of the projects that you deliver?
Well, collaboration is very much similar to what I was referring to before about communication. I mean, collaboration very much, communication is very much a big part of that. So we do, from an external point of view, we're very much collaborating with the architects. The client sometimes the clients may want a really big input into their design. Other clients, sometimes they just let the architect run the show from that point of view. But we're very heavily involved in doing the collaboration with the architects. And it's mainly an architect has, they have to meet certain functions for the building. They have a certain visual, how they want the building to look and feel and that sort of thing. And so somehow we have to go in there and shoehorn in a structure
Make it happen.
that's not impeding the function or impeding on the visual aspect of the building. We appreciate it when they want to use the structure as the architectural wonderment, but oftentimes they end up covering it up unless we start getting into mass timber, and that's a whole other thing too. But so there's lots of coordination involved in that, right up from the beginning, right from the concept. Okay, this is how we can make this structure work. And I kind of think of it as the skeleton of the body type thing. It's like the bones of the building, holding everything up. So, and then it carries all the way through into end of design. And then oftentimes even in construction, there's things that sometimes the architect wants to change things or the client wants to change things, and they're still trying to go back and forth and shoehorning in the structure, if you will. So collaboration is extremely key. Picking up the telephone, doing, Zoom meetings, team meetings, where everybody can sit and take a look at the same set of drawings. Extremely critical to the success of our projects.
Yeah, and I would imagine it, and it really is an art. Like, like an architect, like you're saying, maybe looking for something aesthetically is going to be pretty demanding and challenging for a structural engineer to make happen, facilitate, right, if you will. And so I think learning that back and forth dance. In fact, I think engineers and architects collaborating is also a whole nother episode, most likely, that we could do.
Yes.
You get an engineer and an architect on at the same time. But
yes.
But for those of you listening that are, growing your career in this industry, getting really good at communicating and collaborating is going to help you to go a long way, because really there aren't going to be days in your career where you're not doing those things, quite frankly, on the types of projects that we work on. And, collaborating and then, presenting to other people as well, like the stakeholders, citizens, and the public, so it's a lot of collaboration and a lot of communication that has to happen throughout your career. And so, Brian, one last question that I want to ask you about is, maybe you can share some of your own personal insights on leadership philosophies that maybe have guided you in your role as a principal and has helped contribute to the success of your firm. Because I know a lot of our listeners want to become high-level leaders in their organizations. So I'm always looking for our guests to share anything that they can around their leadership philosophy.
So first and foremost, I think, we have our values in our company is pretty important to us. And it's those values that help us make decisions about certain strategies or how we operate it as a company. As a leader, I think recognizing and knowing people's strengths and trying to support those strengths, and also understanding where their weaknesses may be and trying to find tools or something that can help them improve those things, and just knowing what those are. I find very much good, effective leaders are those who understand the different personalities within the office and are able to communicate with different personalities as well. So I think that's really, really critical, because some people respond in different ways, or they, receive information in different ways. Some people are more visual, some people are more audible, that sort of thing. So, so as leader, I think that's really critical. I think one other thing too that here as a firm, and it's one of our values, and that is it's fun. What we do can be extremely stressful. We're
demanding.
designing buildings, people's lives matter, right? Because we don't want these things need to be safe. And we have deadlines. We're always pushing up against deadlines. So it can be, a challenge sometimes. And so we just need to remember, we need to step back and have a little bit of fun along the way. And so when I'm working with, you were talking about collaboration earlier, I like to have fun with the architects as well, throw a couple of jokes and whatever else, and and then get together for a beverage after work at some point in time, and because these are people that you work with. So I think as a leader, understanding that we're dealing with people and to have a little bit of fun along the way, I think is extremely important. So
that's awesome.
I hope I answered your question.
No, it's great. Yeah. I mean, I think basically what I heard from you there is really a key to leadership is people, right? Understanding people, interacting with people, and understanding that everyone is different, right? And you can't assume that you're going to be able to interact with people the same way, every person, because that's not the way it works, right? I mean, certain engineering calculations you can plug into an equation, but people are different. They're not like, it's not that easy, so to speak. So, and that is something that's important. I mean, we do a lot of kind of project management and people leadership learning and development programs and training here. And that's one thing that we teach in our training is that understanding your own work styles and your own strengths and weaknesses, and then understanding your team members is really important if you're trying to move initiatives forward, because that's part of your role as a leader, is to thinking about, how people might receive information, who's better at certain things on your team. And, part of it comes with experience, of course, but part of it, to your point, comes with learning about yourself and continuously improving on what you're doing, right? And getting feedback from people and then listening to that feedback and making adjustments. So it's really important. And for those of you out there that are interested in leading people, growing a firm, being a leader as a technical professional, as an engineer, the focus on people and people interaction, I think, will be probably paramount in your career. I mean, we talked about it a lot today. We talked about communication. We talked about collaboration, right? So it's not something that you're going to avoid. In fact, you really want to embrace it in your career if you want to get to those levels. So, Brian, I want to thank you so much for spending some time, taking some time out of your very busy day to share some of your kind of wisdom that you've gained over the years and some advice that you could share with our listeners. We really do appreciate it. And I wish you and WHM Structural Engineers all the best as you continue to grow.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. This was great.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Brian. It was really interesting to hear about his construction experience and how he focuses on strategy and communication and collaboration, and how important the two of them are and really intertwined as an engineer. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.